So here's the thing. 1 in 5 girls and 1 in 20 boys are victims of childhood sexual abuse. Now, I did a little more research and I found that 1 in 4 black girls are victims as well. Unfortunately, there's not as much data for black boys. And I know this is probably because black men who are survivors just don't talk about it. Now, I've got a guest coming up on this episode of Build Your Fort podcast that's going to give us a little more insight into his journey and his survival of childhood sexual abuse. He's written a book and he calls it Addicted to Death, where he outlines all the many addictions that he's had to overcome, how he has overcome. Let's get into it.
I'm not going back, better than before. I learned from the past, forgiveness opened that door. I got what I wanted, my life is much brighter now. I tell you my story, how to get an abundant life.
What's going on? What's going on, good people? Thank you for joining me for another episode of Build Your Fort with Lenthius Cheney. I'm your host, Lenthius Cheney. Today we're speaking with an amazing author of a book that I've been reading, putting down a couple of times because it's so real life to me personally, but it is a good book. It's called Addicted to Death. I've got the author in the house, Mr. Chris Lee, joining us to talk about his book, talk about what he's got going on as well in life and real life stuff we're going to talk about today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Lenthius, thank you so much for having me, man. I really appreciate being here.
Look, I can't think of anybody else that I would have in the house today with a phenomenal book like you, Addicted to Death. We're going to get into that. It's such a riveting title, and I think it's one that people are really going to be drawn to and try to figure out, wow, I need to pick this up and read. And so your subtitle is Overcoming Addiction Through Knowledge of Self. So we're going to talk about that. But first of all, how are you? What's going on with Mr. Chris Lee these days?
I'm doing pretty good. As we were kind of talking about in the pre-show, I just recently left my job a few months ago to promote the book, to launch my speaking career, and to launch my podcast. And then a few weeks after I left my job, I got COVID.
Wow.
And so I was down for a few weeks. And then as soon as I got over COVID, I got pneumonia. So I'm just now getting back on my feet after about 2 months of being down. So, hey, I'm just out here trying to get a head start on everything. And of course, you know that your podcast was the first place that I'd come to. So here we are.
Here we are. Yo, that is so surreal, man. So you took a leap of faith, left your job. I understand that you prepared first. You saved a little money. Decided you wanted to move on and do something different and launch your speaking career. And to podcast, and not to podcast your book, but you got a podcast coming too, but to promote your book and work on the launch of your podcast. And then I think that's the thing that people get afraid of is when you're stepping out on faith and you're doing something different, you're going to leave your job. What if something happens? What went through your mind when you realized, oh my gosh, I just left my job and now I'm faced with COVID and pneumonia? What went through your mind during that point?
So at first, my initial thought for those first few weeks was, I want to live is what I was thinking about, because it was a pretty serious case. And so, I was kind of really at a certain point was worried about my own mortality. But once I started getting better and I had the confidence that I was going to get better and that I was going to live, my initial thoughts were, oh my God, what am I going to do now? I saved up this money, about 6 months worth of money. And now I've been sick for 2 months. What am I going to do? But I have, as we talked about in the book, as I talk about in the book, I have developed certain strategies to help me in certain situations, because really we all just, in any situation, we have to ground ourselves.
Yes.
Some days I felt good about things. Some days I felt frantic and like almost in a panic state. But the only thing that changed over those days were the thoughts that I was having in my head. Nothing changed about my situation. So that kind of gives me a clue that the thoughts are what need taming. The situation didn't need any fixing. At that point, it was just time to focus on my healing.
Yeah, makes sense. Most definitely. The mind is a powerful thing. And I think that applies to us in all aspects of life, whether it be getting better, recovering, or taking a leap of faith like you did and leaving your job. Your mind had to be in a way that you knew that you would be okay. How did you know that it was time for you to walk away?
I knew that it was time to walk away when I would wake up. So there's kind of two components to this. One component is the fact that every single morning was a struggle. Every single morning I thought about calling in sick. Every single day when I finished work, I was totally mentally drained. The company that I worked for was a big company. And, kind of like most companies, the better you are, the more work they give you. So the better you are, the more you have to do. And it's kind of like, they kind of own you. So that's the one part. That in itself is not enough to leave your job just because you hate your job or it's wearing you out. You have to have a plan or something else. The things that we're going to discuss today are my passion. And these things are, I feel like, what I was put on this planet to do. So combining those two things, those were the clues that let me know it was time to leave corporate America behind and move on to something bigger and better, come hell or high water.
Oh my gosh, yes, that is great encouragement that your passion is what drove you to be able to, first of all, and I want you all to remember this, have a plan before you just step out there. Many people say, just jump. Well, don't jump without a parachute is what I say. And number two, follow what your passions are. And we know that one of your passions is writing, and public speaking is another passion of yours that you wanted to venture into. But let's start off with the book. Man, Addicted to Death. Overcoming addiction through knowledge of self. One of the things that you mentioned in your book was the fact that you suffered a traumatic brain injury. And that was, again, another underlying thing that forced you to get healed. But you had some other traumas that happened to you early on in your childhood, which you mentioned in the book as well. How did you know it was time for you to write a book, and why?
I knew that it was time for me to write a book. This is my second book, and I knew that it was time to tell this story when I felt like I had reached a certain point in my life where I could say that I was, quote unquote, healed. And I say it that way because when you endure something, what I talk about in the book is childhood sexual abuse and the brain injury, growing up as a part of a religion that I did not believe in, trying to reconcile what God is. You go through various phases of things. So, I knew that I had reached a point where I was okay with sharing my story. And I had a hunch intuitively that if this was a way that I was feeling about my life experience, there has to be other people that feel the exact same way. And that is actually what happened. I started sharing the story, started sending out books to people, and the feedback that I got was amazing. And there were so many people who I had no idea had experienced some of the similar things that I did. And so that is really the most gratifying part of writing a book, honestly, is when you share something deeply personal about yourself and somebody says, yeah, that was me too. I went through that same thing, or I'm going through that right now. I haven't really looked at it yet, but this is helping me to heal. That is like the ultimate gratification or fulfillment with being an author.
Wow. One of the things that I noticed throughout the book is that there are different things that you are addicted to, that many of us are addicted to, whether we realize it or not, throughout our lives. But each chapter, you talk a little bit about the different phases of what you called addicted to death and how those addictions can lead to death, whether they be overeating, whether it be alcohol or whatever it be. But I think that what I found is that it started very early on for you with church, where you were taught that, God is going to punish you and that he was going to kill you for XYZ, when the things that happened to you as a kid weren't even your fault, but you still felt as though that there was going to be a day that you would become, I don't want to say the word victim to, but the reckoning would come, the wrath of God, which, I believe in God as a loving God, not the vengeful, wrathful God. But why is it that you associated everything else with death from that instance?
So growing up as a kid in a Black church, a strict Christian religion, the theme as a kid that I always picked up on was death. Was if you're disobedient, God's going to kill all of the disobedient people. And in the book of Bible stories that my parents would read to me as a kid, depicted people drowning, people being beheaded, and the thing that scared me of all as a kid, because those were things that happened in the past, this future event, this Armageddon, where there would be a day of reckoning where Jesus and his angels would come down on their horses with their swords and exact vengeance upon all of the sinners. And there were depictions in the books of, people being killed and fireballs hurtling through the air. And, another theme that would come up quite a bit was sex. And they would talk about, you're not supposed to have sex unless you're married, and how awful sex is. And, and looking back on it as an adult, I'm like, this is weird that this is a theme that they keep bringing up. You're at church with all these families and stuff. And so in the book, I talk about an experience that I had with a babysitter when I was a kid, and sitting in church after that and hearing, this preacher say, whoever has sex before marriage will feel the full wrath of God at Armageddon. And I'm thinking, that's me. God is going to kill me. I didn't want to have sex. I didn't mean to do it. And now God's going to kill me.
Wow. I think that many people will relate to that. Me also coming from a background of having a sexual abusive type of situation as a kid, and not understanding the fact that it wasn't your fault, but you do feel the guilt, the shame, and the responsibility for whatever happened to you as a kid. I take it that type of experience follows you. Well, I shouldn't say I take it. I know it from a fact. I have to get outside of the journalistic talk right now and talk about, I know for a fact that the effects of that follows you into adulthood. And it does bring up feelings when it comes to meeting people and dating and marriage and all of that throughout your life. How have you been able to overcome that?
It has taken a lot of hard work, a lot of knowledge of self. So when the way that the human brain is wired, when we have an experience, especially an experience like sexual abuse, your mind is saying, oh, this is, like, I didn't really understand at first what was going on, but intuitively or just naturally, that this is something that should not be taking place. This is something that is improper. But at the same time, we're all humans. The term that I use in the book is that your body betrays you.
Yes.
So this may be something that's not even enjoyable to you, but because it is sexual stimulation, your body physiologically responds, right, which can create a lot of confusion, if this happens to you as a young person. So, and as you, and this is just real talk, this me and Linthy is kicking it.
Oh, yeah.
It had been something that influenced my behavior within relationships, because what had happened for me is it caused me to confuse love and sex.
Yes.
So, throughout my teenage years and my early adult years, I was seeking love through sex.
Yes.
But the type of sexual partners that I was choosing were not capable of providing me with that love.
Exactly.
Along with that comes a tremendous amount of guilt and shame.
Yes.
And the way that the human mind works is homeostasis is what our brains and bodies go for. You find what's comfortable and stay there. And so you get into that place where in your mind is running in the background like a computer. Shame and guilt is shading every single thing you do, every decision you make, even if it is not of a sexual nature, of the partners that you choose to date, your career choices, whether or not you feel worthy of achieving a goal, it really gets deep down into your subconscious and affects you in so many ways.
It's so very true. I relate to everything that you just said. It's 100% true. And I think that there is a stigma with men coming forward and admitting to the fact that they have been sexually abused. And you happen to have an experience that was with a female abuser, but there are a lot of men who've had experience with male abusers, and that causes even more shame and more stigma in bringing that to the forefront. So I commend you for speaking out about that. I'm hoping that more men will come to the forefront, if not publicly, but within their own minds, and understand how that has affected them and how it's affected their relationships with women or men going forward in their lives, because it's such an important thing to recognize and rectify within yourself. So thank you for putting that in the book. I've shared with you before, and I share with all of my guests also, my forthcoming book, Toxic Ambition, will touch on my experience of that, because I think that was the catalyst for the people pleasing, for the seeking for validation, the seeking for love. You put it so eloquently, is that in relationships going forward after sexual abuse, many times you look for love and you confuse love and sex, and many people become quite promiscuous in that search for. And it's just not healthy. But step one is understanding and realizing. So thank you. So you moved on through talking about your relationships with other substances and other things. And each chapter talked a little bit about addicted to XYZ, which was like addicted to death. Take us through a couple of those chapters and ultimately how you overcame them.
Yeah. So my first addiction was addiction to food. And that is something that people don't really look at as an addiction, but absolutely anything that you use to self-soothe or to heal yourself, that's kind of like abusing that thing, even if it's something positive. Even like, I love the title of your book, Toxic Ambitions, because being ambitious can be toxic as well.
Yes.
So like being addicted to food, it was like, that was, especially as a teenager, that was my comfort. I took solace in that food. And this is where the knowledge of self piece comes in. What I started noticing with food is that I was using food physically to stuff my emotions energetically. So a lot of times when I would eat fast food, I would be thinking about things that have made me upset. It could be things that happened in the past, something someone did or said, but as I'm scarfing down this McDonald's or Burger King or whatever, and I'm in my mind, I found myself, I'm like, why am I angry every time I eat all this food? And so I just kind of started noticing that. Also in my teenage years, that is when I was introduced to, and that became kind of like my drug of choice, and there's a part in the book where I talk about hitting, and there were so many times where I thought I hit rock bottom, but I hadn't. But the real rock bottom, one of the rock bottoms came for me when I got pulled over by the police twice in the same and let go.
Yeah.
Couldn't believe it.
Man, you were blessed. You were a blessed young man. When I read that in the book, you got pulled over twice the same night and let go twice. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And this would have been like late 90s, early 2000s. I think in today's climate, neither one of those times would have went, because I think for the police, I don't know that they were necessarily looking at race. They pulled over this well-dressed, well-spoken Black man in a nice car, but the second cop, I could not believe that he said, "Do you think you can make it home from here?" He knew that I was drunk. And he was like, "Yeah, you think you can make it home? Hey, good luck. Have a good day." And I thought in that moment that was a sign for me to turn around and stop, which it was, and, to change my life. But I continued on that path. And, it was like there was something that needed to be healed that wasn't healed. I always tell people when I talk to them that alcoholism, addiction is not a root cause. It is a symptom of something else in your life that hasn't been addressed.
Yes.
And so I had not yet addressed a lot of the things that I talk about in the book. And then after the brain injury was around 2006. I was a fake it till you make it kind of guy. Don't rock the boat, go along to get along.
Mm-hmm.
After the accident, I no longer had the brain capacity to fake it anymore. So I had to just, my life, I had to look at everything, even the ugly parts, and say, this is my life. I can't fake it anymore. And then after the brain injury, that's when the addiction to opioids started. My doctor was just writing prescriptions for a Vicodin like it was nothing.
Yeah.
So I'm Vicodin, I was on Ambien and, other antipsychotic drugs and stuff, and drinking. So all of those things together, that was a really, really bad mix.
Yeah, that's a deadly cocktail right there, man.
That is, yeah. That's how Heath Ledger died.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
Didn't know that.
A cocktail of opioids, sleeping pills, and alcohol.
And it seems like that's really prevalent in this society today. The opioid addictions, which goes into a whole nother podcast to talk about how it's viewed now versus when the crack epidemic was going on in the Black community back then. But we'll table that one for now. But one thing that I found that stood out to me in the chapter when you were talking about, your addiction to alcohol, was that the young lady that you were dating recognized some patterns in you that she had seen before in the past. And she made the decision at that point to, I see these things and it's something that I'm not willing to deal with again. And I found that to be so strong of her to be able to recognize that I've been here before and I'm not going to do this again. And it was a testament to how many times we get into situations knowing good and damn well that this is not going to end well, but we do them anyway because we think that maybe it will get better. But she was a really strong young lady. Do you keep in contact with her?
No. After I moved from Tennessee back to Detroit, we lost contact with each other. We had spoken maybe once or twice, and we had two mutual friends. And so we've all lost contact with each other. And it seems as if none of them are on Facebook. So nope, I spoke to her maybe a year or two after that briefly, and that was it.
Wow. But that was a powerful message. And even if you didn't call it out directly in the book, it's evident that, someone was willing to save themselves and walk away because they understood that this is something that they've seen before and they're not going to go through again. So thank you for adding that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That was, believe it or not, of everything that's in that book, that was actually one of the toughest chapters to write.
Wow.
To go back and reflect on that and think about, as I mentioned in the book, is this an opportunity for true love, that I messed up because I chose alcoholism over, this beautiful young woman.
Yeah. Yeah. You, after your brain injury and your addiction to opioids, you had a conversation with your daughter. And I think sometimes we don't realize how our family can be affected by our addictions that we don't even recognize, but they can see. How has that been? How did she feel coming forward to be able to say to you the things that she said and how she felt that you were behaving during that time?
Yeah. So her and I are actually very close. And in my first book, I wrote about being able to spend time with her every day, and that being one of the good parts, part of the silver lining of the accident. And it was good that we were able to spend so much time together because I ended up being off work for about a year, a little over a year. And so I was, from my vantage point at that time, she was about 8 years old, and I'm like, this is cool. I get to spend time with my daughter. Whereas over the years, her and I having discussions, we talk a lot, and she's pretty open with me about things, about most things. When it comes to dating, maybe not so much, but about most things, she's pretty open with me. She's in her early 20s now. And to have her tell me that basically she felt like I had died, but my body was still here. Oh, that was just crushing.
I can imagine.
No parent wants to hear their kids say that, and she basically felt like she spent that summer with a stranger because she said it was like, because, when you have a brain injury, your brain is trying to reestablish all those neural connections that it had before. And you literally are a different person.
Right.
Your personality is different. You change, and then the way that you act or behave when you have a brain injury is not the way that you used to. So it was like, she said, been stuck with the new kid at school and not having anybody else around that you could put them off on, And so that was hard. That was hard. We've all have done therapy, and that is something that I recommend for everybody. And that's something that has been extremely helpful and useful. I don't write about it in the book a whole lot because I focused on the knowledge of self piece, but the therapy is something that was very, very helpful. Or even, a lot of Black people don't like going to therapy, which I can understand. And why would I tell a stranger my problems? It's like, one, you get to have somebody as a sounding board, a person who has no vested interest in various parts of your life. Because you say, I just talked to this person or that person. Sometimes we talk to our friends. They have a vested interest in what happens in our life. And sometimes their advice may skew us towards, what they like best or what's best for them. That's the other thing. And then the other part that I appreciated about therapy is some of the strategies that I got for coping were able to help me develop further strategies, and just the way to take an experience and reframe it, or kind of grab yourself and kind of pause and kind of turn the heat down, so to speak. Those are some really good things that came out of therapy.
Okay. Very good. And so in the book, you talk about some tools that you've put in place that help keep you grounded, and when you find yourself getting out of sorts, that these exercises have kept you on the right path. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yes. First of all, my favorite thing to do is meditation. I love doing meditation. I do it every single day, just about, sometimes several times a day, depending on what's going on with me. And what meditation does is it grounds me, and it kind of helps me to come back to center. The way that we live our lives is like, especially with the pandemic and as fast paced as life is, we live our lives like a pot of water that is just getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And when you see people having road rage, or they snap on the job and do crazy stuff, that pot of water reached the boiling point to where they just can't take it anymore.
Yep.
What meditation does for me is kind of turns the volume down. Well, is your pot on the stove analogy? It turns that pot down on low, so that gives that water a chance to kind of cool off a little bit.
Very good. Any other tips?
Yes. So there's meditation. The secret sauce for me was something called tapping, or emotional freedom technique, where you tap on different points on your face, your eyebrows, the side of your eye, under your nose, under your mouth, your collarbone, under your arms, a liver spot, and then your wrists. So you can do that, and you can either say an affirmation, you're affirming something, or you can tap something out. So I used to have really bad panic attacks for whatever reason. Even though my accident happened on a side street, being on the freeway used to trigger me really, really bad. And it still does sometimes. Yeah. So I'll kind of tap it out. I'll tap that out. Or lately I've been tapping a lot of affirmations in. But these are meridian points on the body, kind of like energy centers. And what happens is, when we focus, even if it's subconsciously, we focus on an emotion, that emotion, we have our regular body and blood flows through our regular body. We also have an energy body, and energy flows through our body. And like Tai Chi and all that, that's what that's all about, is moving around energy in your body. So what happens is, these emotions get stuck or lodged in our body. And they get stuck in, like, anger is associated with the liver. And this is like traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, joy and sadness with the heart, grief with the lungs. So we're feeling those emotions, they get lodged, they get stuck. and it impedes the energy flow of our body. And what EFT does, we tap on certain meridian points, is it releases that and helps the energy in the body to flow.
That is very interesting. And, it's reaffirming from something that I learned from Lisa Nichols, if you know who she is.
Yes.
Many years ago, when I read her first book, I was, many years ago, was enamored by that book. She talked about negative self-talk and how it would paralyze her when it became time for her to start doing public speaking. And I didn't know that it was called tapping until you just explained it to me. But she talked about how she would tap her forehead right here, kind of like a tape recorder. So whatever was going on in her mind as she was telling herself, the lies that she was telling herself as to why she was not worthy or could not do this, she would relate it to pressing the pause button on a tape recorder, and she would pause it or she would stop it. And so doing that physical activity actually got her out of that thought. And I never really realized that that's what tapping was until you just explained it to me. So what is the head? You talked a little bit about where the liver is and different parts of the body. What does tapping the forehead does? Is there something associated with that? So this
is like your third eye chakra.
Okay.
Which chakras are energy centers in the body as well. And kind of like tapping on those energy centers, there's different energy centers or meridian points in the body. It's kind of like saying, hey, wake up. Because, the same way that we, you get lazy, you get tired or whatever, you're tired of doing the same thing over and over again. That happens within your body. With certain energy points. So there's not necessarily an emotion associated with that part of the body, but that's one of the points where energy can get stuck, though.
Understood. Yeah. Okay. Well, something else you mentioned to me was, meditation. Now, I have not been successful with being consistent with meditation because I'm such a routine kind of person. To sit in a room by myself alone has in the past been extremely difficult.
Yeah.
But I found my most solace when I took what I called a meditation a few months ago to Detroit, which you must go to Inception in Detroit if you have not been there.
I've heard about it. I got to go there. I've heard about Inception.
Yes, you have to get there. Farmington Hills. Farmington Hills is exactly where it is. And I took a week of doing different type of techniques. And I would say that electromagnetic brain training and also float therapy were two of the ones that really resonated with me. All of them are great therapies, but those two I most enjoyed. It was difficult to lay in warm water, floating in darkness and stillness, but it was the best thing to desensitize your mind and your body from all the stimuli that we get on a daily basis,
Yeah.
And when you mentioned road rage, I so get it because when I came back from my meditation, everybody around me seemed crazy to me. Because I was moving at a very more slow pace. I was coasting. I was calm. I didn't have a care in the world almost, really. Nothing could really bother me. But I can see the people around me were just absolutely nuts. When it came to strangers who were in cars behind me, when I'm waiting to merge and they're so impatient and they're blowing the horn and and I'm like, wow, we live a life with all of that bottled up in us for so long. And I wonder what happens when you don't let that out. What happens to the person?
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. So that's how so many a connection. And I don't know why the medical establishment does this. There has been so many scientific studies by Dr. Joe Dispenza and a bunch of other people who study brain science. There's a link between having these emotions over and over again and those emotions manifesting into physical sickness. And for whatever reason, the mainstream medical establishment does not really acknowledge that. But, when you hear about people dying from cancer, so many women having fibromyalgia and all these other autoimmune diseases, things like that, All of those are rooted in some type of an emotion that we dwell on or think over and over and over again. And that mind-body connection by the mainstream medical establishment has not been established yet. I don't know if it ever will be established, but because to me, that was the true key to healing from addictions and all sorts of things. Because when I was going through the addiction and trying to break the addiction, I had a host of medical things that was wrong: high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, fatty liver, irritable bowel syndrome, you name it. And I, over the course of about a year and a half, 2 years, I lost almost 100 pounds.
Wow.
The first thing that went away when I dealt with the emotions were the illnesses. So normally how it goes is you lose the weight and then all of the stuff goes away. But the stuff went away first because I was in a position where I was dealing with all of this emotional baggage, things that stuck in my emotional junk drawer. And, lo and behold, all of these physical things started, falling. And, a year and a half I was off of all these medications because, the thing that was driving it, in the unseen, that was gone now.
That is amazing. So where are you now with things? How are you doing?
Doing good. Healing is a never-ending process.
Yeah.
You heal one thing and you think you're done with it, but it's like peeling the layers to an onion.
Yeah.
So I would say the biggest thing that I am healing from or that I'm working on right now is building up my confidence for the things that I'm moving into, for this new stage of my life that I'm moving into with the speaking and stuff. And so what happens is, and this is, again, is just Chris and Lindsay is talking. What happens as you move into something new that is out of your comfort zone, a lot of those old patterns start to come back.
Yeah.
So I start thinking, am I good enough to be a speaker? And then I'll go speak somewhere and people are like, that's amazing. Am I a good enough writer to make a living off of writing? And then the other thing that I see that you have a very good handle on, and this is kind of like a tip for entrepreneurs, because I learned this the hard way years ago. Regardless of what your thing is, whether it's speaking or real estate or voiceover or selling bundles of weave, whatever, you have to know how to be a good marketer. Yeah. You have to study marketing. Yeah. Or, you might have a great story and a great product, but you have to know how to get people's attention and be consistent, reaching out to see you on social media. You inspire me, actually. And so that's my tip for entrepreneurs is, regardless of what your craft is, you also need to become a master marketer or have the means to hire someone who is a master marketer to do it for you.
I believe in, if you can't do everything alone, you do what you can. Yeah. And put people in place to help you get to where it is that you're trying to go. I'm at that point where a lot of things I do myself, but I'm at the point now that I can't continue. You have to be able to grow. So if you don't put people in place to help you grow, then you're continually trying to do it all by yourself. You're just going to further slow down the process of you getting to where it is you're supposed to be. So, thank you for saying that. But how I learned, and again, another tip for entrepreneurs is watching others. Why reinvent the wheel? If you don't know what to do, go and take a look at people that are doing it the way that you would like to see yours, and then figure out how you can make yours a little different. Tip number 2 is just do it. Because if you sit around and you wait for it to be perfect, you're never going to go anywhere with it. You're going to sit and continue to make it be perfect. And absolutely. I suffered with that for many, many years of, I can't do it until this, or I can't do it until that. When I did this podcast, I did what I could. I did do my research, and I did look at people who were doing it and how I could do it and put my own spin to it, and hired the right people to help me with photography and graphics and all of that. And then just did it. Was it perfect? There are some of them that I listen to today that I'd be like, oh my gosh. Whew,
That's a part of the process, though. That's a part of the process.
And that's how you learn. You listen to where you were and you expound upon where you want to be, So yeah, you got to just get out there and do it. You just got to get out there and do it. So you touched on the fact that you're moving into a new stage of your career with public speaking. Why? How?
Yes. That's a great question, actually. So that's something that has been a passion of mine. Speaking, running my mouth has been a passion of mine. I always got in trouble for running my mouth in school.
Yeah, me too.
Class clown, funny guy and all that. I feel like I have a really powerful story to tell. And I feel like that so many of us are on a mission to help people and to help people of color because we need help in our community. But I also feel like we are almost there. So many of us are on the same accord and bring our own spin on things and our own story forth to help other people. And I feel like this is just a time where it's really, really, really super important to. One of the things that I have learned from some of my mentors is at the same time, while you are being mentored, for you to mentor other people. And that has been, you're just like a conduit for great things. And so, I've been working closely with Sean Blanchard and Keon Clinton is helping me with my speaking career. And it's just, they have poured so much into me, which allows me to kind of pour into other people and to kind of become a vessel to help others and end up lifting your own self up in the process. So that's really what I'm looking forward to.
Well, get ready as I pick up the phone and I call you and I say, Chris, I'm ready to go ahead and finish this book. I need some encouragement. It's a process. Yes. It's a process. And as much as I work, and I think we all work to get over some of our own idiosyncrasies, imposter syndrome is one that I still deal with sometimes. Can I write this book? Will it be good enough? And although I know it will, I'm just taking my time getting there. Let's just say that I'm taking my time getting there.
Yeah. Here's the thing I like about, from what I see, I mean, we talk, buddy, we talked on the phone and stuff, but from what I see, one advantage that I feel like you have is with you being in real estate and having your Airbnb and all that stuff, you have bona fide social proof that you are successful at what you do. And I think that's great. That's a part of what's super inspiring to me. Is you got the social proof. It's like, look, this is what I do every day.
Yeah. And I find it kind of difficult for me to marry the two. How do I marry this podcast and a book and all of that? And I've gotten to the point that I've said, you know what? It's okay. I'm just going to do it. And you need to understand that I am this and I'm also this. And I'm also this. And you tap in where it is that you feel most comfortable tapping in with me with, whether that be Airbnb, whether that be real estate, whether that be the podcast, whether that be the book or any of the other brands that I have under my belt. So my advice for myself and my advice to other people is not to be afraid to just try whatever it is that you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Chris, I thank you for this amazing talk. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I hope that someone out there somewhere gets good knowledge and are able to walk away from this podcast learning something from you. You are a wealth of knowledge. You've been through a lot and you're helping people heal. And I think that is what's most important about you, is that you want to help your people heal. What words do you have as we end our conversation today? Anything else you want to say? Any words of encouragement or advice you have for people out there?
Yeah. The advice that I give that you'll see in a lot of my social media posts, you got this. It may feel impossible. You may feel like you're in a position where I don't know what to do. Things always work out. Unless they put you in the ground, there's still more to your story. You got this.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you. Same to you. You got this. I got this. We got this. And
yes. I got to have you on my podcast too. I'm launching my podcast in about a month. And so I want you to be one of my first guests.
Hey, you know, I'm there all day long. Tell everybody the name of your podcast and when it's coming out.
Yep. The name of the podcast is the Jofara Podcast, Jofara. That is an acronym that stands for Join Forces and Rise Again. And that is something that I will promote on the podcast, is bringing you the best in Black excellence so that you can learn from them and also get proof that it can be done and that you can do it as well. And it'll be launching in March.
Well, I'm looking forward to that, man. I'm there. Just say the word. And I'm not going to say I'm going to have my suit and tie on, but I'm going to have something on and I'll be there.
That's okay. Yeah, because Linthius, you are Black excellence.
Thank you.
I'm going to hand you your flowers over there, right?
Thank you. I take them.
Yes.
I take them. And that's another thing, is sometimes just being okay with saying thank you and not being modest all the time. It says, oh, no. Take it.
Yeah.
Take it. So thank you. I take that. I appreciate that.
Yes. Thank
and
you.
the same to you, my brother. You have an amazing day, and I look forward to chopping it up with you again soon and being on Jofara. Let me know when it's there, and I'm ready for you.
Awesome, man. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate you.
Thank you.